Hey there, I'm Sarah McLaughlin. Thanks for joining me on the Chaos to Calm podcast, a podcast designed for women over 40 who think that changing hormones might be messing with their mood, metabolism, and energy, and want to change that in a healthy, sustainable, and permanent way. Each episode will explore topics related to health and wellness for women in their 40s, like what the heck is happening to your hormones, what to do about it with nutrition, lifestyle, and stress management, and inspiring conversations with guests sharing their insights and tips on how to live your best life in your 40s and beyond. So, if you're feeling like you're in the midst of a hormonal storm and don't want perimenopause to be horrific, then join me on Chaos to Calm as I share with you how to make it to menopause without it wrecking your relationships and life. Hello and welcome to this episode of Chaos to Calm podcast. I want you to buckle up because today's episode is going to be quite the journey. And our tour guide is Amanda Trieger. She's a mother, a naturopath, a herbal medicine goddess. And when she's not busy whipping up herbal potions and lotions in her clinic, Amanda is advocating for menstrual health like it's nobody's business. Such important work to do as well. So Amanda, as I said, is a naturopath. She's also a yogi, doula, and obsessed with all things menstrual cycle. She works from her home clinic in New South Wales, and she balances her work, a family, and even some farm animals there. She's dedicated 2 decades to supporting women and their health. So she's all about reclaiming womancraft and tuning into our cycle and the wisdom that comes with that. She fuses modern medicine or naturopathic medicine with age-old wisdom, creating a really holistic approach that views the menstrual cycle as a fifth vital sign and really values it as being that fifth vital sign. Amanda has been a sacred birth keeper and doula, so she's been there for many miraculous moments when life begins and a new mother is born. She's a lifelong student of the world, and her expertise delves deep into the biophysical and archetypal energies that could be behind your stress, exhaustion, and hormone hiccups there. So grab a cup of tea and settle in because Amanda is here to awaken the wise woman or the Maga within you. I hope you're excited. You should be. This is an amazing episode we've got for you. Welcome, Amanda. Thank you so much for joining me today. And can you perhaps start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be menstrual health advocate and so interested in cyclical health and rites of passage?
Yeah, gosh, it's such a lifelong journey, isn't it, to unpack why it is that we do what we do. But it's always been something, working with girls and women was something that I have done from a very young age. I trained as a naturopath and a doula at the same time when I was around 20. So I've been doing this now, I'm 41. So it's a couple of decades of loving this work of really understanding not only the women that I work with, because what I was finding is these great tools and rhythms and techniques that I would teach people, they would see change and they would see shift, and then it would all get taken away from them in the linear world that we live in. And so I went on a discovery of my own, having a beautiful family and working with so many beautiful women and practitioners, and really looking at how do I avoid burnout, fatigue, overwhelm, which was unfortunately the story of my life at that point in time, transitioning through motherhood and getting really frustrated with what I knew should be in place and unfortunately what's not in place.
Yes.
And it helped to galvanize where I wanted to go, and understanding cyclical awareness was this last moment of really loving my own body and loving my cycle and understanding that menstrual cycle is the fifth vital sign of life, that when I'm really in true alignment, everything else flows with more ease. So it's shifted the way I create relationships. It shifted the way I ran my business and my practice. And the women that I was working with were just receiving such beautiful shifts and changes that were really nourishing their entire family and community, not just themselves. And that's what drives me to do this work, and it drives me to work with other practitioners to really get those big ripples of change for positive menstrual health and advocacy out there, because it's ridiculous to me that it's 2022 and women are still facing an uphill challenge when it comes to
Yeah, I agree.
understanding their menstrual cycle reality and the whole timeline from birth through our transitions, through our rites of passage, through these transformational portals that women have an amazing capacity to step through. But we're not supported through those. We're not told stories of those where there's lots of different reasons that we've lost that wisdom and knowledge. But my goal, my aim, my focus in what I offer is always about building that community and connection with that
connection. I was just going to say that I think the problem for us is the lack of connection with ourselves and our own bodies, but within the way that we live. Like Western style is so isolated. We grow up with our family and move out and go and live on our own, or with our own little family. But if we look at many other cultures, they're doing it right, I think, in many ways. There's one mortgage to start with, but also, the different generations to help each other and learn from. And that story, like if you look at Indigenous Australia, storytelling is so massive through so many cultures. But I don't feel like as a white person, I didn't have the stories. I certainly wasn't talking about menstrual health or menstrual cycle. I felt a lot of shame, and I know I'm not alone or dirty. And maybe shame's not the right word. I've had this discussion with someone else recently too, and I'm not sure that's it. I don't know if you've got any better ideas or descriptors of how people might feel around it when we're moving through our teens, and it's almost like we try and hide it, like you hide your pad or your tampon and pretend like it's not happening.
This is the taboo in action. This is the menstrual taboo in its full force, because a level of discomfort about a normal, natural, biological process that actually helps us to live more vibrantly, to understand our well-being, and gives us, I would say, extra power to really harness the way that we live our life. Being disconnected from that, being ashamed, being uncomfortable, being, in that feeling of needing to hide or pretend. I don't know how many times you've turned up at work and like your work face is on and everything's perfect and nobody sees anything. And put on these superhuman concepts of woman and mother. And, if it's such a big journey into reclaiming our own comfort with our bodies. And a lot of the work that I've been doing over the past couple of years has really been advocacy with girls.
Yes, because important.
Shifting this conversation and talking to the mums, they hear it, but they change it for the girls. So just like I work with birthing women, because pregnant women, they hear it and they change things because it's of importance to our future generations. And so things that maybe bothered us a little bit or made us a little bit uncomfortable, we see that reflected in our daughters. Instant. We're going to get women starting to shift and change, and our daughters are asking for better. The studies that are coming out, the information that's coming out is really clearly saying that this taboo is shifting and changing. And it is a ripple effect backwards as well, because as we create girls that are quite comfortable in their body and quite conscious in understanding how their cyclical well-being is now in science and finally in literature, which is the first time ever that we're seeing. I think the first, just to give you a really ridiculous example, because like when we bring it back to the ridiculous, people really understand it. The first ever experiment to test a menstrual capacity, so pads, tampons, period undies, however you're testing capacity of absorption, was done with actual blood just recently.
Oh, I thought you were going to say like however long ago. That doesn't surprise me, but it is
No,
disappointing, isn't it?
no, that's the first time in the last month that we have actually had an absorption assessment done with blood rather than water or colored liquid. So it reduces it to the ridiculous, right? Like how, when even in our science, menstrual taboo is present.
Yeah, well, it sounds ridiculous, but it's reality.
So when we understand that, it's these really gentle sideways conversations of role modeling, normalizing, just coming up with cycle awareness that helps us to even just start to become aware of those feelings and what triggers them.
Yeah.
And being really gentle with ourselves around that.
And do you think, like, so this is happening, that change is coming? I find that really heartening, because sometimes I think, oh, it's just because of the, we hang out with naturopaths, or we're in these circles and we're talking about these things, or, but it's good that, to know that that's not just that, but it's happening sort of in spite of our 24/7 not cyclical society that we live in. Like, it's pretty much days are the same, I think. And I think that's sort of part of the problem, like men and, hark back 70 years ago, and mostly men were working and women were staying at home. And so that work culture and workspaces are, they're not, I mean, they are cyclical beings too. They're still, but not like we are.
Yeah, not driven.
Yeah,
not driven. Well, they are driven by a cyclical nature, but they have a 24-hour diurnal rhythm, right? So the world is actually designed for men, because men designed it, and it worked for them. That's great.
Now we need to make our Barbie world, like in the movie Barbie. I'm assuming you've seen it, because I think everyone has. And if not, go see it. And I want to see it again. But yeah, where they design their world, but women have designed it, and then the men or Ken takes over, and it changes, and
the patriarchy comes in, and it's
like,
what is the patriarchy?
Yeah, so you touched on it before as well, about menstrual health, or your menstrual cycle being that fifth vital sign, and it's something I love talking about with my clients. But can you tell us a bit more? Well, it might be the first time the listeners have heard about what a vital sign is, or what that is, but yeah, tell us a bit more about how you use it, maybe in your practice or with your clients.
Yeah, so often it will be one of the consistent tips. So the 4 vital signs of life that show us how healthy we are things like heart rate, which shows how quickly our heart's pumping and whether or not we're stressed or we're calm. We look at blood pressure, we look at the breathing rate, we look at temperature. So all of these tools that can feed back information about how well our bodily processes are running. And I would say, although it's the 5th vital sign of life, it's really number 1, honestly.
Yes.
For me.
Yeah.
It drives everything, and it influences and it is impacted by everything. So, menstrual health is not just a biophysical reality. It's a social, sexual awareness that comes through. It's our physical, emotional, it's our connection with self. It's providing us with a cyclical framework that, if it's in alignment, if it's really healthy, if your body's really nourished, you won't be seeing a lot of symptoms or language of the body coming through on a regular basis. But what I often find with women is, because we live in a linear world where it's Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, weekends are holidays, school terms holidays. What I find with women that are really in a masculine structure or corporate role is they have to bring this into the 1% to begin with. You have to, and Red School's got a big 1% rule, that this concept of how do I bring in a cyclical check-in every day to see where I'm up to see how I can support myself, to really understand what I need in this phase of the cycle. And that's what I work to really empower that information. Because what we eat, how we exercise, we are different hormonal creatures on different days of the month. And how we treat ourselves really matters. And men don't have that rhythm or that fluctuation, but they also then don't have that creative exposure either. So when we look at a cyclical framework for women, it's also really deeply bound within the creative cycle and the creative framework as well of how do we start new projects? How do we bring new ideas in? How do we manifest? How do we present? How do we, really hit that peak production area where the world loves to live 24/7? But anyone that's listened to Brené Brown at any time recently understands that you can't live in 24/7.
That's right.
Thank goodness she's getting through to the corporate
I
structures.
know, it's good, isn't it?
Yeah, and we need these times of reflection. Just like the seasons of the year, we have seasons within.
Yeah, I always think it's like, you take your foot off the accelerator to ultimately move forward further in the long run. And so what you're saying is that, or the cycling is breaking down our menstrual cycle, that 28 to 30 day whatever it might be for that person, into weeks or
so into weeks, into 4 phases. And look, don't misunderstand me, not everybody has an exact week that each phase lasts for, but the concept is the same. So whether or not you have an active menstrual cycle of you're regularly getting flow and period time, whether you know where your ovulation is or not, this is where we start to join in the awareness of the menstrual cycle. If you don't have an active menstrual cycle, if there's no physical uterus there, if you've transitioned into menopause, if you're PCOS and your cycle is erratic, or you're in perimenopause transition, you're pregnant or breastfeeding, we recommend at that point that you would start flowing with the moon. So even though your hormonal rhythms, until they become fairly regular, your driving energy is really in that lunar flow, because the hormonal triggers underneath will pattern in and out, trying to move towards that ovulation. It's the body's goal. But so much of the time, other influencing factors can come in and really impact that resilience of the brain and the ovaries and the womb and how everything works together.
So how would that work? Like, so I'm in menopause. I don't have a cycle and haven't for a long time. And how do I equate that to the different phases of the moon, like the full moon or the new moon? Where would I start the cycle?
So I would start by just bringing some moon gazing in. So there's I'll give you the link to the free lunar guide that comes along. So if you've got an active cycle, you do the cyclical guide. If you don't have an active cycle, you flow with the moon. So there's a guide for if you're just flowing with the moon, and there's a guide for menopause, because
perfect.
They're two different things as well. But the information is really relevant to both. So when we flow with the moon, you start wherever you are currently at. There's no perfect start point. The beginning of the lunar cycle is the beginning of a new cycle. It's that dark new moon portal. Because we know the science now, we know the exact moment from dark to new moon. But it used to be when the crescent came in, that was the beginning of the next cycle. So when we're looking at dark new moon portal, there's actually one every month, which is really exciting. September, we actually begin a brand new season. It's the beginning of Rosh Hashanah. It's the head of the new year. It's this really powerful portal of transformation, where in the dark moon, it's a time to let go, to release, to journal out what you don't want to be there again, what you're ready to let go of. Often the week leading up to dark moon, you can feel a little bit, how can I put it in a really gentle way? Your boundaries can be really strong, and your righteous fire can come up. I'm ready to fight on whatever cause is close to my heart. And if you can direct it into that, fabulous. It's when it boils out and bubbles up over the rest of the family that it starts to become a problem.
It becomes a bit awkward.
And look, when we layer in, the frameworks that surround us, we are creatures that are impacted by lots of different energies. When we have a menstrual cycle, that kind of drives us. That's our main energetic wheel that we flow through. We also have the lunar energy that comes over us. So if we're in that dark new moon portal, it's a time of release, reflection, dreaming. It's that time of connecting in with your intuition and dreaming of what you're going to bring in for the next cycle. But to do that, you've got to let go of something. You've got to
Yeah.
let go of what's not working for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the energy lifts up towards the full moon, it's that expansive new spring, new energy. You're going to be more interested in being curious about conversations and starting new projects. Might be
So that
something
would
that you
be
want to.
kind of like ovulation time, is that?
So that time would be from when you're coming out of the crescent moon up
Mm,
to the point where it's like almost full. And then
right.
at
Or
ovulation, that
pre-ovulation. Yeah.
full moon is that kind
Yeah.
of summer, that full moon celebration, those full moon
Yeah.
parties, those like, look at
Your
me, I'm
energy
so
might be high and
fancy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you feel good. Yeah.
Yeah. The flip side of that is you can feel really scattered and really disconnected and really
Mm.
anxious and really busy and really intense.
Oh, that's me around a full moon always. I'm
Can't
like, why
sleep
can't I
and
get anything
right,
done?
can't put anything down. And
Yeah.
so it's knowing these rhythms that regularly happen and being able to do your energy management of okay, how do I know me and my being? And like
Mm,
what sort of foods might I eat that would be different, that might ground and tether me? What sort of
mm,
activity might I do? What sort of supports might I put in place? There's lots of different aspects of, how those energies can really impact, but for me, it's about teaching women how to work with those energies and how
yeah.
to recognize when there's dysfunction, because I think society really normalizes
Oh,
dysfunction.
absolutely. Normalizes pain,
Yeah.
PMS, all of that. Yeah. Like
Mm.
takes what, 10 years for a woman to get diagnosed with endometriosis or something like that because they just spend so much time getting dismissed or it's all in their head
Mm.
or that's
Yeah.
just what comes with the period. So yeah, definitely. So I was thinking while you were talking there, so as you're cycling, you're thinking about maybe the types of tasks or work that you might do, maybe in that scattered full moon time, sticking with the easier or low demand tasks
Mm.
or things that you can, get that dopamine hit
Yeah.
and tick off
If
easily.
and if that's it's working with what pattern works for you. Like
Mm,
what do you find of most ease? Because if we're going on archetypal, really good energetics of I'm balanced, I'm stable, I'm in connection and alignment, dark new moon is the release. Sometimes your shadow stuff will come up.
mm-hmm,
It's your new intentions and planting seeds. So imagine if you've got like a rosebud that's coming down and it's growing that seed the whole way through until you hit full moon and
mm,
you get to show off all the good things and the
mm-hmm,
seeds and all the flowers and then we come into harvest and we
yeah,
like cut off things that aren't working anymore and get rid of the stuff and replant the soil and let the seed hips
mm,
fall back into that wise space. So yeah, there's such value in living cyclically. It
mm,
means that we stop burning out. We start to really have function that's achievable for us as well. Because when you know what really works for you and
mm,
you've got jobs to do over the month and you know that, I'm going to be great at that at ovulation
yeah,
or full moon, or I'm going to be great at that at my menstrual time because it's a boring job that I don't need my brain to do and I can just like do
yes,
the thing.
okay.
So
Yeah, that's really like transformative, life-changing. Absolutely. Imagine if our girls grew up knowing that from their,
that's the
teens.
goal.
Mm,
To shift this paradigm so that when we have, and I'm working with CEOs within corporate settings to really start to shift this into their realities
yeah.
because they are cyclical and most of the women that work for them are cyclical. So if you can
Yeah.
take advantage of that, if you can utilize that as a benefit within your business,
Mm,
great. We can shift businesses as well. So
mm,
we will see it start to come in through the framework because if we're shifting the menstrual taboo, we're shifting the discomfort of girls to claim what is rightfully their ability to rhythm their lives and to
yeah.
live in a way that's really healthy. And I honestly think when we look at the rate of medication around that perimenopause transition of women that are
Mm,
being medicated by high level antidepressants,
mm,
because of the disconnection and the awareness of their hormonal rhythms,
yeah.
we are just seeing a generation of women that are knowing that it's not the answer. And they're sharing their stories. We're
Yeah.
starting to speak. We're seeing birth trauma inquiries. We'll
I know,
see
isn't that
menopause.
incredible? Like when
Yeah.
I had my eldest child 19 years ago and it was traumatic, no one ever talked about it because, oh, you've got a healthy baby, so it doesn't matter. I think that I feel like this is a big, we're moving into a cycle of change, and
Yeah.
the conversation is part of that. And
women's
it's
voices
so
are
great.
really clearly being heard.
Yeah.
And they are speaking and sharing their stories and going on to podcasts. And,
Yeah.
everyone's been given this opportunity to really unite in an awareness of, hang on a
Yes.
second, we're all thinking the same thing. We should just do it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? For a lot of it, we just, because when you're not encouraged to talk about things, or like when I was growing up, and probably you the same, there's that lack of connection, but technology gives us the opportunity to connect in a way that we've never been able to before. Sometimes they're talking about things like this on the radio, but not so much. But you can tune in on a podcast or the internet and find the content that resonates with you. And then you might be unexpectedly be thrust into talking about or thinking about cycling and moving with your cycling, because people like us are dropping that in everywhere that we can.
Everywhere that we can.
Yeah, that's it. And making people understand that common doesn't equal normal. And I think that's the disservice that's done for us across all of the lifespan, whether we're a teen of reproductive years, perimenopause and menopause. These really common symptoms or things happening are written off as that's just normal, but actually they're not, And it's like what you were saying with antidepressants being used for so many symptoms. And I think it just builds that disconnection and trust in ourselves and our bodies. And I don't know, our bodies are amazing. You've been doing this longer than I have, and I'm sure you're still filled with wonder and amazement almost daily.
And watching women transition through their rites of passage is another amazing way of really recognizing how spectacular we are, because
yes,
these portals of change, these doorways of transformation, and probably we have 3 major transformative experiences over our lifetime before we then pass, not to mention all of the other amazing things that I'm sure happen to us. But if you ask a woman whether or not she's honored any of those rites of passage, probably the one she's honored is her marriage or her wedding day.
Yes. Yeah.
They prepare for it. They have rituals and rhythms. They have cards and gifting. There's an acknowledgement of who you are before this moment will never be the same as who you are after this moment, and a recognition of who you are starting a new life. Not the best one to be like really putting all your eggs in the same
I was just thinking that as well, because I'm like, it's kind of like we're celebrating that moment when we not lose ourselves, but we become part of like a coupling. Yeah. And there's,
and if you haven't really acknowledged your own self and honored your own self within that, you can understand why marriages are so complicated when we are journeying together, because we're discovering ourselves again. So we start this journey around menarche when the first period arrives, and I dive into menarche stories and teach other practitioners how to unpack those menarche stories with women, because there's a few responses that we regularly receive, and one of them is, I have no memory of any of that. It just, it's just always been there, and I don't remember anything special. Or that there's been fear or sadness or upset. But there are very few stories of an empowered, recognized menarche for women that I've spoken with. And I think this is the perfect place for us to begin, because honoring and acknowledging and teaching the girls, we see a flow through the whole menstruality timeline. We see women not ashamed to ask for support and assistance and demand better care. We see women empowered in their birth choices and empowered in their discussions with their partners.
Yeah.
about what they like or don't like, what they're
Yes.
prepared to say yes and consent to or not. And
Mm.
we see women who are asking for help in their postpartum and saying, hang on a second, this society is ridiculous
Yeah.
in its
Yes.
expectations.
Yes. Yeah. I am seeing that more actually. And it's, yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
It's
And
so
we see
heartening.
those women stepping up in menopause and telling their stories of what that transition is like, because just like puberty, which is a decade-long process
Mm.
for the hypothalamic, the pituitary, the brain to speak to the ovaries to start that regular conversation and build resilience and pathways, which over a decade, if you interfere with that, will have complications. So if we're
Mm.
putting in the oral contraceptive pill, if we're putting in any kind of hormonal contraceptive before that 10-year decade,
Mm.
we see complications coming in, and
Yeah.
that disconnection from this cyclical wisdom. And so we see a
Yes.
flatness that comes in.
Yeah.
So, at Menarch, we have a trigger, we have an awakening. How we celebrate that, how we're acknowledged, how we're received,
Mm.
it really matters. And a lot of the time, the women that I work with, we have to do that for ourselves. We have to go back into that timeline, and we have to love our inner maiden up, and we have to give her the
Yeah.
gifts that maybe we didn't get told or gifted at that
Yeah.
point in time, so that we can then come into our next transition and integrate that knowledge. So, wherever you are in your timeline, whether that's the mothering time, birthing and honoring that rite of passage,
Yeah.
mother of one or many, or whether it's coming into Maga and into that menopause transition, which takes a good decade, possibly longer.
There's a theme here.
There's transition points. Imagine that. It's how do we bring honoring and acknowledgement of what we have learned, the wisdom that we've gathered. Maga is undervalued within our society in the menopausal woman, of standing in her wise woman and harvesting all of the years of experience
Yeah.
and offering that back. It's undervalued, and it's demonized within our culture.
Well, I think probably a lot of women might not even know that term Maga, or have thought about that cycle in the different, the maiden that you were talking about before. And then because Maga was new to me as well, like sometimes if we might have heard about the crone, in a group I was in the other day, they were talking about being postmenopausal and a crone, and I was like, well, I don't quite feel like I'm old enough to step into crondom, but this is where you were explaining to me about Maga.
Yeah, and look, when I teach the seasons or the wheels or the energies, we actually layer it all on together. So if you think about Maga as that autumn time, that time of stepping out of the intensity of summer and motherhood and busyness and full moon and go, go, go and all the things for everybody, right? And we step into autumn and we slow down and we reflect and we release what we don't need anymore, the menstrual cycle, because we already have those tethers in place, and we tether to the lunar rhythms, and we really understand the lunar rhythms because we've lived with that lunar rhythm inside of us for such a long time. And so we start to embody the wisdom that we've held rather than having to cycle and cycle and cycle. Our intention goes from being of service to everybody to, Jane Hardwick Collins talks about the veil of estrogen lifting, and the hormone of accommodation and community and doing everything for everybody else really shifts. And we start to become a lot more aware of what we want, what we are going to define about self. She's the harvest queen. She is the woman in her prime. But unfortunately, in our traditional prime, we didn't have long lives. So if you hit menopause, congratulations, you're a crone and you're an elder. Tick, maiden mother, crone. We now have a good 30 years of our life between when we are mother and in time of intensity and when we are elder, crone, sitting by the fire, not going out. I'm sure everyone's got a great grandmother that's like the elder of the family that doesn't leave the house. You go to her, you nourish her, you look after her. That's not our Magas. Our Magas are bringers of change and the fire keepers and the ones that'll stir the pot because they know how to.
Yeah.
So we really need this Maga aspect to hold community really strongly, because
Yeah.
it's those wise women and that reclamation of honoring that wisdom that really does help to balance out the awareness for our society. And it's through our storytelling that we start to share this as well.
I did, like, hearing you talk about it, I just feel really excited. And I think, some people are like, oh, perimenopause or menopause, the end, well, because our society values young, pretty, and fertile. But when you describe that, I'm like, well, I'm in that phase, but I want to be that. I want to be a change maker. I want to think about what I want and what I want to do for the next half of my life.
Yeah.
I think that's so, if we have more conversations around that and what Maga and this phase of life is, who wouldn't want to be in perimenopause and moving to menopause? I mean, it sounds so exciting.
Yeah. And it's not the reality that we're presented with in society.
No.
And it's certainly not the reality I grew up with. I grew up with, I unfortunately was that woman at the birthday party night of a girlfriend who they're all I don't drink because it makes me violently ill. It's not a choice and reflection on anybody else, but I was pretty sober. And I got introduced to this beautiful woman, and she was like, oh, my friends told me all about you. She said, I'd absolutely love you. And then she stopped and she kind of listened to the conversation I was having with another woman, and she goes, you're really scaring me, and I'm just going to walk away. Because I was saying, we go into our menopause transition at around 40. Like, regardless where you are in your parenting journey, your body biochemically, around that time energetically, we shift into transition. And we have to be careful with ourselves, and we have to look after, the same as coming into autumn. Look after your immune system, look after your well-being, like really nourish yourself. And because I'd said the word menopause, she was like on the other side of the room going, oh my God, I can't talk to you. There's such fear.
Well, and I think that's also because we tie menopause to age, and menopause equals old.
Yeah.
And actually the reality is, because of how long we live now, it's not. I mean, I'm not 49 yet, and I'm menopausal. Yeah. I say to people, I think this is the best phase of my life. My kids are getting older. My youngest is now 9. We can do more, financially we're more secure than we were when we were only on one income. Life is good for me, and I think, this is great. I can do a lot. I know what I want, and I know what I don't want.
Yeah.
And I'm really clear on that in a way I wasn't 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So,
it's consciously redefining that as of benefit. Transition and transformation of, like, if you want to be the same person turning up every day, that's not going to happen. If you're biologically female, it will be an unlearning process of recognizing cycle as benefit, as power, rather than consistency and turning up and doing the same thing every day and doing willpower what you said you were going to do. Like, we've been taught a really dysfunctional way for a cyclical creature. So it's a big shift. It's a big change, but it is a powerful one. And especially when you're at that menopause transition, it's one where you really plant your feet and cut through all the crap.
Yeah. And I think that's why it can be quite dangerous for many relationships as well, because it's like we're going through this major evolution and change, and the, particularly men around us or with us, then, they have a andropause. It's a little change, but it's certainly not as such a big shift as us. And if they don't keep up, or they're not, and if we're not talking about that and explaining and describing how this feels for us. I know I do it often with my husband, either like, just bear with me, brain rewiring, I can't remember the thing, or I'm really clear, I don't want to do this, or I'm going to do this, or I need to look after myself in this way. So he knows, most of the time he knows where he's at with me and what's going on, and he can adjust and change too. But I feel like I understand now why there's lots of relationship changes for women in this phase of life.
Yeah. And we redefine our boundaries, and how our partners are able to grow with us is interesting. You know, you talk about the ability for us to know our own beings, let alone communicate that to the men who have no consciousness around, no even lived experience really. So we go into the seasons with them. We're like, you know, summer, you know, it's like really hot and really intense and really overwhelming, and like we party all the time, and that's how I'm feeling right now. Or like the middle of winter where you can't go out and you just want to be inside and you're cold, and you know, it's like physiologically. But you know, my husband has been an amazing advocate, and we've worked through, he knows more about women's bodies and menstrual health and well-being and birth than anyone else I know. And he still comes up against blocks of, oh, I shouldn't really be speaking about this, or it's uncomfortable for him.
Yeah.
Because that's what's been ingrained. So when we look at the triggers and how we respond to these big conversations around changing dynamics, it's interesting. But one of my favorite stories was about a man that was asked, you know, how he'd lived with the one woman for the whole of his life. And he said, I was so lucky. I fell in love with a maiden who was like vibrant, had all this energy. And then I got to be partner in life to a mother who nourished my children and showed me what love was, and really helped to support me to grow as a human by watching this outpouring of love and capacity in motherhood. And then I watched this woman completely transform herself and come back into Maga and come into that rite of passage of really owning what she wanted and who she was. And I got to be a partner on that journey. And I think that really reflected for me, you know, no matter who we are, at that soul core, it's about how we respect and support each other of who we become. So I try really hard to remember that with my husband when I'm like, you're not doing the things that I want you to do. And he's like, I don't understand.
Yeah, just tell me, let me know. Oh, that was said. It's just beautiful. So I wanted to ask you before we finish up, because I think we're talking, you know, you were talking about rites of passage and being cyclical. And something I was thinking of earlier in the year was, how do I mark that I'm in menopause? Do I throw like a party? Like what? So what would you suggest? Like what are you thinking when it comes time for you, or what do you suggest with your clients? How do we mark this rite of passage from mother to Maga?
Yeah. And it's so different for everybody. So for some women, it's a private ceremonial aspect of they'll buy themselves an amazing piece of jewelry, or they will send themselves away for a weekend, or they will just really honor their connection with self. What I do recommend is having something that you begin anew as you crown Maga. So in the facilitations that I offer, it is a circle. So it's, you know, all of our women come together and they offer their stories of their Maga self. So it might be that they're not Maga yet and they're offering their wisdoms of what they hope for the future. It could be that they're the crones of your community and that they offer the wisdom back. Or it could be that they're the maidens watching this transformation and really soaking up that wisdom as well. But when we have a circle of, it's almost like a blessing way of how do we really acknowledge who you are, what you offer, and the transition of where you are stepping into. So the role that you become. So we can bring a ritual into it where we brew tea and intentions. You can make like a salt scrub or bring all the herbs in it and bring all the wishes into that beautiful creation, and then, you know, scoop out some and everybody takes a jar home and comes into connection that way. But what we're doing is acknowledging this role as the transformation in the way that it's best suited for the woman who's present, but also really role modeling that for the rest of the community, you know, crowning Harvest Queen of what does that look like? A wreath of flowers, an acknowledgement and a letting go. You know, some women do a closing the bones ceremony, which is like a wrapping and a closing off of a stage of life. Drum journey. So you can make these aspects big, you can make them really small and sacred, but acknowledge it. So it's interesting. We were having a pretty big conversation the other day of, you know, what is Maga, when is Maga, and what is menopause? Because I've got some clients that are in their late 20s, early 30s that are in a menopausal body currently, but they're not in their Maga. They're not in that transition phase, but they don't have an active menstrual cycle. And so it brings up these conversations of, you know, if I have my ovarian function, so I have a cycle, but I don't have a physical cycle, am I coming into Maga? How do I know I'm coming into Maga? So for me, I give it a time and an age because it really sits with me. Maga transition begins at 40. In our transition time, we are not Maga, we are not mother, but we're in this like portal of shift and change.
Yeah.
Biophysically, menopause is the last menstrual period birthday, 12 months after you've last bled.
Yeah.
It doesn't, that's like, congratulations, tick, you've hit 12 months. What does that mean?
I know it is. It's kind of like, you know, you don't even ever know that it's going to be your last period until it's already been and gone.
Yeah.
And because that would otherwise, it's a natural celebration point or ending point. Yeah.
Yeah. Have different kind of relevance. Yeah. So one of my mentors, Judy Moore, had a beautiful practice in perimenopause where she got, and you could do it with anything that was your thing, but she had a little box of beads and a little string of beads, and every dark moon that she didn't bleed, she would string like a little dark bead, like dark bead. Getting too many words in my mouth. And every time she bled, she would thread a bright red bead or something different for the days that she bled. And so she could count the moons in between her bleeds. But it also gave her then an awareness and a potency and a checking back in with her cycle that she could see the patterns that were coming forwards and really have gratitude and acknowledgement of the transition state that she was in. And I think that's a really beautiful practice, whether it's a little book that you get or a little beading kit. Some people I know crochet a line every time. They do a blanket line every time.
Yes, that's also good. We did a bracelet for a blessing way when I was having my third child. We did that, and it was so lovely to see it and have it and hold it, and then I like
our tethers and our anchors are so important to our remembrance of, and I think, you know, our grandmother's dressing tables would have been their altars. There's special things from there, you know. It's how do we bring some of those rituals and rhythms into, if it's a big ceremonial circle that you want to have like that blessing way, it's beautiful. Or if it's a private ceremony of like, how do you really connect in with yourself and honor this rite of transition for you?
And is that something that people can read more about on your website, Amanda? And we'll pop that in the show notes.
There's lots of articles on how do we create ritual and rhythm, how do we support our rites of passage and honoring those as well. So I'm happy to have a chat to anyone that really is interested in learning a little bit more about it, because it is such powerful work when we truly step into that connection with self and honoring ourselves like we honor our children and our partners and celebrate them.
Putting ourselves there
we
too.
just went through where my daughter's stepping up towards menarche, and again, like the last period, we don't know when the first one will start either. But really checking in with, you know, how do we celebrate our rites of passage from a young age? And with our son, that was done through men's circles and honouring, and a year-long, well, probably longer than a year, but a dedicated year of how do we really honour the next human that we will become, the next young adult, and what values do we bring through and what understandings do we need as we become this next version of self. And,
Mm.
having these rites of passage really change that they don't go out and seek them out for themselves.
Yes, good point. Yes. And we can help that do it in a gentle and safe way as well, and like a deeper reflective state. My 9-year-old, she's already planning her period party. She can't wait. She wants to know when it's coming. My now 16-year-old, we did we went to a circle and together, and they had some time on their own exploring the seasons and cycling, so that was really beautiful. And actually, now with what we've talked about today, at the time I remember thinking, oh, I wish I'd had something like this. Would have been the perfect opportunity, because I'm sure I wasn't the only mum thinking the same way. For us to have our own would have been really lovely. There's something about the power of women in circle that's really next level, isn't it?
Transformative. Yeah. And I didn't experience that really being safe in a circle or a group of women until how old were my kids? So I'd created it for myself before I then experienced it externally with another group. And I went, this is what it feels like to be really, truly held.
Yes.
And finding it in others was really powerful for me.
I would say that's similar for me. It was on my third child, and falling into a different circle or group and just feeling held in a way I've never, ever been before, and realizing, oh, this is how it can be. This is how it's meant to be. Totally life-changing. So before we finish up, Amanda, we talked about that rite of passage, and we've talked about, navigating to Maga and stepping into that role. Is there anything else that we haven't covered in terms of cycle and menstrual health and advocacy? We've covered a lot.
We could talk for years.
I think so.
Probably the only other aspect that I find is really under-discussed within anyone in this transition time, whether that's young, pregnancy, or stepping into Maga, is that we tend to be really disconnected from our vaginal health as well. So our biophysical reality of checking in with our comfort around vulval and vaginal well-being, it's not something that we've been taught. It's something we're often ignoring. When we're talking about libido and sex drive, they all change around transition states as well. So there's so many aspects to our sexual well-being as we go through these transition states that I'd really encourage anyone that's listening that has recurrent thrush or itchiness or irritation or dryness. This Maga transition can be complicated from a biophysical reality of like, how many supports do we have in place? What's our history being like with our nervous system? All impact whether or not we've got great vulval and vaginal architecture and health moving forwards in our life.
Yes.
I would say that's a very silent issue currently. So most women that I talk to about it will say, yes, that's a problem for me, but it's not, they're not asking for help.
That's true. Yeah.
I would just layer that in of, if you're having microbiome issues for vaginal health, if you're having bladder infections, if you're having any kind of irritation and pain, please reach out to a naturopath or someone that's vaginal microbiome specialized, because there is so many great topical ointments, pessaries, all sorts of goodies that really help you to thrive.
Yeah, because
and enjoy your well-being.
It doesn't have to be something that you just put up with or grin and bear it and wait for it to pass, which I think is another.
And it doesn't have to be HRT or nothing.
Yeah. And also I think what's important too is that if HRT is the decision that someone makes or that's the path they go on, it's not mutually exclusive. We can still work with food as medicine, herbs, nutrients, all of that without it interacting there as well. And keeping that cycle and honoring that cycle within yourself there as well.
And I hope that it just starts these conversations of, wow, that's really interesting. I'd never thought about it like that. or, oh, I'm really excited to get into Maga.
Yeah.
Like I'm looking forward to Maga
Yes.
now. And my number one tip would just be cycle track.
Yes.
Check in with yourself
Mm-hmm.
daily, whether that's lunar or menstrual. Just that is the biggest key to creating change. Yeah. And I run, there are some mini programs that I run, which are online. So if anyone's
Beautiful.
interested in like learning the basics of how do we track, how do we chart, how do we temperature chart, or just all the things about cyclical well-being, there's a women's challenge or a women's program that's on, and they run about every 6 weeks. So they're on the website. I'll give you the link. And the practitioner challenge is the week after. So that's when we go a little bit more into women holding space for women and how do we really layer this information into everything that we do, our treatment plans, our business models, our structures, the way we communicate with our clients, all of it. So, and that's really where the big shift's going to come, is through our beautiful practitioners that are already doing this work. They just need that last key of information that's going to change so much.
Yeah, bring it all together and then be able to have that ripple effect and influence the women around them and the men too as well. Yeah. Thank you so much, Amanda. A beautiful episode. And like I said, like who wouldn't want to be moving into Maga now? Hearing you talk about that was just so exciting and thrilling. And I mean, I'm here, but I'm also like, yay, I'm here now. So I hope everyone, the listeners, are feeling that way too. And I will put in the show notes your website and the link to your programs there as well. So anyone that does want to embrace cycling or learn more about it, they can certainly learn a lot at your website and through you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. It's been such a lovely, and as I said, we could talk for days.
I think we almost have. Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
It's really common for women over 40 to experience the chaos of changing hormones, mood, metabolism, and energy. But I hope you know now that common doesn't have to equal normal for you or them. You can help others understand they aren't alone in feeling this way and that perimenopause doesn't have to be horrific by subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing this podcast with other women in their 40s and beyond. Thanks so much for listening and sharing your time with me today in this Chaos to Calm conversation.